Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money. I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. Poverty is the parent of revolution and crime. Aristotle. Hey everyone, welcome to the Greek Civil War segment of the Diogenes Lamp podcast, episode number 28, the SOE, Organizing Guerillas and Gorgopotamos, part 1. A few housekeeping items before we go any further, just because I repeatedly forget to mention this kind of stuff. Just want to give a shout out to my listeners. I have about 10 to 20 solid listeners that seem to be following along with this segment. So I really appreciate you guys consistently following the story, all the way from Australia, the Netherlands, Germany, Greece, Qatar. Where else? There's a lot of you guys out there, and you seem to be from all around the world, so I really appreciate you tuning in. And I hope you learn a thing or two, or maybe even 3 things. I hope you learn a lot of things, because I know I do when I'm have been reading and researching this kind of stuff. So, additionally, if I ever make a mistake about a date, or this, or that, feel free to message me on the Instagram account. Just let me know. Additionally, this week, I do intend to make a Ask Me Anything poll. Literally, you can just ask me anything. Ideally, it is relevant to what we're talking about, but I don't really care. So, yeah, that'll be hopefully this week on the Instagram account as well. So, really appreciate you guys. Really appreciate the listeners from around the world. Please subscribe. Please leave a 5-star rating or whatever on Spotify as well. It's little, but that stuff makes a big difference. I don't even think any of you guys are even listening on Spotify. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. And if you're listening on YouTube as well, because I do have a lot of YouTube listeners, decent amount for a small podcast, I should say. Yeah, please like, subscribe, all that jazz. It makes a big difference. Only something like 20% of listeners on YouTube are actually subscribers. So please give the subscribe button a click. So let's get into it. Where we left off last, we got a bit of a feel of a couple of major characters in our story going forward. Those 2 fellows being Napoleon Zervas of Edes and Aris Velukiotis of Elas. Well, generally speaking, if we look at the last 3 episodes, so 27, 26, and 25, time-wise, we are right around springtime 1942. So that puts us right after Aris Velukiotis and his Elas bands come into being, and about 4 months after the catastrophic Akison event in Antiparos, which was in January of 1942. And as you can tell also by the title of this episode, we are going to be revisiting the SOE and some other characters in our story today. So if you need a refresher on who and what the SOE is and what not, like as in you're just tuning into this episode, please give the episode on the SOE a listen. It's pretty thorough and it'll give you a really good idea of what they are and what they do and that kind of jazz. All right, let's get into today's story and rewind a bit back to March of 1942. The SOE Cairo office at the time went ahead and passed on to Prometheus 2 to get ready to welcome SOE agents that would be arriving in a few months via parachute, as in dropping from the sky. And by welcome, they meant prepare to be able to accommodate them with safe places where they would be able to operate without getting shot at or captured by Axis troops or like the Gestapo. Additionally, it was passed on to Prometheus 2 that weapons and explosives would also be dropped via parachute with the agents, so hey, that's really important stuff. Please make sure it's well cared for. And Prometheus 2, by the way, was the successor of Prometheus 1, as you could probably guess, right? Prometheus 1 was in existence until the Atkinson shit show happened, and Atkinson got busted on Diparos and yada yada yada, and the whole Prometheus communication system, went away with Atkinson. So now we're on Prometheus 2. I just wanted to mention that. As April of 1942 comes along, Odysseus, you guys remember the smuggler turned SOE agent smuggler? Well, he just got back from a trip to the Middle East, and he did what he did best, which was smuggle stuff back into Greece, most notably a sizable amount of funds and equipment to help with espionage, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare operations. Shortly after Odysseus got settled back into Athens and had a minute to relax, another Greek who was working with the British MI9 and head of an underground escape network arranged a meeting between Odysseus and several other senior Greek officers who were the heads of a variety of Republican underground groups in Athens, in addition to a representative of EAM, as a kind of, hey guys, we're all in this together, eh? But instead of the meeting achieving anything like that, all it really did was bring to light the cleavages between the Republican and the more left-leaning resistance organizations like EAM. Another fellow, Alekos Sefiriadis, tried to talk some sense to the Republicans by pointing out that if you guys don't take some leadership roles within EAM, then that vacuum in those leadership roles will be filled by the left, and most notably by the communists, who we know you hate. Keep in mind that at this time, the KKE's role and other communist organizations' influence within EAM was not exactly a secret, but the severity of the communist influence in EAM was still a bit hazy. Either way, the Republican resistance leaders weren't having it, so much so that they threatened to terminate all contact with the Cairo SOE if they were forced to cooperate with EAM. So, you get the idea. But Levides still wasn't discouraged, even after that garbage fire of a meeting, and he set up another meeting. This time he has Odysseus meet Zervas, a Kominos Pyromaglu, and a Mr. Charalambos Koutsoyanopoulos, which that last guy, the Koutsoyanopoulos guy, by the way, he was the head of the Prometheus 2 network. This time around, Levides was able to make a breakthrough, and the participants of the meeting agreed to instigate guerrilla activity. And I use the word instigate because, as we know, Edes and other resistance groups had already been formed at this point. But it's one thing to have a resistance group, and another to have them draw graffiti or help POWs escape Greece or even bomb Axis ships in the harbor. But it is quite another thing to actually tell your resistance guerrillas to start ambushing and shooting Axis soldiers. One set of actions is more so sabotage and subversion. The other is guerrilla warfare. So the meeting went well. So well that not just did they agree to actually start really getting down to business, but they even agreed on designated areas. Zervas agreed to concentrate on his hometown of Epirus. Psaros and his crew would take control of operations in central Greece, and Stephanos Sarafis would concentrate on Thessaly. Lastly, the participants of the meeting told Odysseus, hey, pass this on to your SOE contacts and go ahead and divvy up those 2,000 gold sovereigns that you just brought back from Cairo amongst us. Odysseus said, "I'll get back to you on that." But 10 days later, Odysseus got news from the Cairo SOE office that the British pounds should only be distributed to Eam and Edes, which obviously was bad for the other smaller Republican resistance groups. Additionally, the SOE seemed to get a little annoyed with this Levidis fellow making all these meetings, and they told him to stop making these meetings, stop worrying about organizing resistance groups, and focus on getting British POWs out of Greece. This fallout from the meetings had some other knock-on effects as well. One of the bigger ones being that it's at this point where Odysseus starts to lean more towards the KKE, while Koutsoulianopoulos, remember the head of the Prometheus II network, kept in contact with Edes. It's also around this time that Zervas started to feel that the British openly favored Eam over him and Edes. This caused Odysseus to get nervous, who then embedded himself with the KKE, supplying it with something around 7,100 gold British coins, and just as important as that stuff, a wireless set that enabled Eam to have direct contact with the Cairo SOE office, as in, they no longer had to go through the Prometheus II network. The gold coins, of course, helped immensely when Elas was founded in late May of that year of 1942. Shortly after this, the SOE in Cairo made the decision that Zervas was no longer to be trusted, and thus they ordered Prometheus II to cut off all contact with him. Ouch. Some attribute Odysseus' skewing of information coming out of Greece to this break between Zervas and SOE. Koutsoulianopoulos, though, seeing how much effort and work had gone into organizing and activating, per se, this guerrilla force, decided it would have been a waste of a good opportunity to completely cut off the poor guy, Zervas. No one wants to be picked last in dodgeball, after all, right? So what does the SOE agent Koutsoulianopoulos do to light a fire under Zervas' ass to actually get moving and get doing guerrilla warfare stuff? Well, first they gave him a large sum of gold coins. According to historian Mark Mazower and others, the number 24,000 comes up a lot, which is a lot of fucking money in Axis-occupied Greece, to say the least, right? But when this wouldn't get Zervas off his ass to get moving, who, by the way, was a well-known for being a gambler, a drinker, and somewhere between the spectrum of a sex addict and a womanizer, well, then Koutsoulianopoulos and the SOE had an ace up their sleeve. They threatened to expose him and his resistance operations to the Gestapo if he didn't leave Athens within 24 hours. This really got Zervas moving, as being threatened by capture with the Gestapo tends to do. It's at this point, in July 23rd of 1942, that Zervas packed up and shipped out for the mountains of northwestern Greece, Epirus, where he finally took on the job of being the leader of Edes. At the end of the summer of 1942, the SOE had conducted some notable sabotage operations. Some we've mentioned in previous episodes, but these small wins, when compared to the beating the British were taking in Europe and in Asia by the Japanese, well, after all, the goal of organizing these resistance groups was to get, quote-unquote secret armies that could re-inflict some of those losses back on their enemies, right? You have to get even. Going down that direction, let's talk a little more about the SOE, who was a more so up-and-coming department when compared to the well-established MI6 or like the Foreign Office. So the SOE was really looking to make a splash, per se, to show its rival organizations what it could do. So in September, when General Harold Alexander, the commander-in-chief of British military operations in the Middle East, asked if the SOE could help disrupt the supply lines of the German army in Africa, the SOE jumped at the opportunity to prove themselves. And so, what would become known as the Harling mission was born. The operation on paper looks pretty simple. There's a bridge that a rail line runs across called Gorgopotamos that runs over the river Gorgopotamos. This is one of the main rail lines, and the operation was supposed to coincide with a major British offensive in Egypt, thus blocking German supplies getting down to Africa if it all worked out. Land in Greece, blow up the bridge, that's it. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of it all, though, right? Because nothing is as easy as it seems. The whole operation was led by Eddie Myers, a royal engineer in his 30s, described as quiet. The second in command was Chris Woodhouse, just 25 years old, and a Philhellene, you could say, who had learned modern Greek and took part in the Battle of Crete, where he stuck around for the brutal winter of 41-42. 10 others were chosen to be part of their crew. Of the 12, consisting of 3 sappers, 3 commandos, 3 wireless operators, and Themistocles Marinos, who Woodhouse knew from before the team was assembled, only 4 of the 12 spoke Greek. Myers, the leader of the whole operation, did not speak Greek. 3 British Liberator aircrafts, one with Myers and his squad, another with Woodhouse and his squad, and a third with John Cook and his squad, would take off from Cairo, carrying 4 men each dropped at slightly different locations. Upon landing in Greece, they were supposed to make contact with some Andartes. Please remember, Andartes and guerrillas will be used interchangeably. So, how to get there? Well, we already know kind of how, right? Via aircraft, parachuting into the mountains. But how do they know where to drop? Well, the Andartes would make fires in the shape of a cross that would mark the zones for dropping the SOE agents into. But the first 2 trips all the way from Cairo to central Greece were a failure, as no fires were spotted. And obviously, you don't want to jump into the dark mountains of Greece with no clue where you are or where you're going. Besides, you follow orders when you're a soldier, and the orders said to find the crosses of fire. Finally, third time would be the charm at the end of October. Woodhouse and Myers' groups saw the fires and made the jump, landing just about 15 miles apart of each other, with Woodhouse saying, and quote, "It was no harder than stepping off a table." Myers didn't have as easy of a time, though. His parachute got stuck in the branches of a tall tree, and when he went to release his harness, he rolled down the mountain side, banging into a second tree, which stopped him rolling off the mountain. He survived, but he was completely alone in the mountains of Greece. After a couple of days, he was found by the other 3 men in his group, and they made a makeshift refuge under some parachute material and branches. Just 15 miles away, Woodhouse again got a bit luckier and found a narrow cave right below a mountain peak, and about a week later, Myers and crew and Woodhouse were all able to connect. But what makes any trip to Greece a trip to Greece? Philoxenia, of course, the love of the stranger, or more simply speaking, Greek hospitality. Myers, Woodhouse, and others were constantly brought food by local villagers who were simultaneously eager to help and afraid of being caught by the Italians. And most notably, the SOE team ran into a Barba Nicolas, or Uncle Nicolas, which, as we know from our past episode on Barba Yani, referring to Metaxas, Barba is a term meaning like an endearing uncle, right? So Barba Nico led the whole team to a much nicer cave and brought them food from his village, which wasn't too far away. When asked why he risked so much and went out of his way to help the British, he said, and quote, "I heard God had sent us Englishmen from heaven, so it was my duty to keep them." Both Myers and Woodhouse are recorded to have said that they would not have survived without Barba Nico. So a huge help. So, first objective, land in Greece alive. Completed. Second objective, make contact with Andartes. At that point, they had made some contact with one of the guerrillas, like Gerolymatos, who proved to be absolutely useless. There was some chatter in the village about Aris and Elas bands, but it was just chatter and no one knew where this god of war was. There was a solid lead, though, leading to Zervas and Edes, and the Prometheus 2 network was able to get a message to the SO team via a runner that Zervas was just 80 miles or so north of their location. Woodhouse was sent to make contact, and on November 10th, he made contact with Zervas. From there, Woodhouse, in company with Edes guerrillas, set back out for Stromi. Upon making their way back towards Stromi, the village close to where Barba Nico greeted them, Woodhouse is met by the Aris Veliotis and a crew of about 116 Elas guerrillas. Something else I really want to touch on as well. Perhaps you noticed, perhaps you didn't, but I never talked to you about what happened to the third plane with John Cook's team. Well, it's at this point that Woodhouse finds out firsthand from Aris what actually happened to his friend John Cook. It just so happened that John Cook's squad had been dropped near Carpenisi, right into the outskirts of an Italian garrison town. Somehow, they were able to evade small arms fire and mortar fire, and it was Aris and his partisans that ended up sheltering John Cook's crew. By November 17th, everyone was reunited at Stromi. Meyer's first impression of Zervas was, and quote, a short and rotund figure. When he laughed, as he so often did, his whole body vibrated, and the merry sparkle in his eyes bellied the black, hairy fierceness of a heavily bearded face. The moment he stopped smiling, his large brown eyes immediately gave his round face and full, generous mouth a serious yet understanding expression. An unpolished Sam Brown belt around his ample waist supported a small automatic pistol and a jeweled dagger whose sheath was liable to stick out from his stomach at a jaunty angle when he sat down. I was immediately struck by his outstanding personality. End quote. But what did Myers think of Aris? And quote, he was a small man of wiry build. His long black beard, which balanced his Cossack cap of black fur, could make his face look benign and almost monk-like. But his eyes were deep-set, and except when he smiled, there was much harshness in his features. Only when he mellowed by alcohol did he ever relax. Silent and inclined to be dour, he always gave me the impression of being on guard against someone or something. And, knowing what we know about the torture Aris Religiotis endured at the hands of the 4th of August regime and the Venizelos regime before that, this description kind of checks out, right? With those side-by-side comparisons, we can tell that Myers was clearly getting better vibes from Zervas than he was from Aris. But while Aris wasn't, a quote, bland and easygoing company director, as one SOE operative referred to Zervas as, Aris definitely made up for it in the size and strength of Elas, who, as we've seen, would put up almost double the guerrillas that Ades could muster, for now. And this is something that will not go unnoticed by Zervas and Ades. And on that note, I think it's a good place to end for today. Please join us next time as we continue our journey through the mountains of Greece and make our way to complete our third and final objective, take down Gorgopotamos Bridge. Take care, everyone.